The fellowship hall of an old church in Shreveport, Louisiana, was packed. The dim yellow light cast a glow over the wooden pews, where a mix of serious and curious faces were fixed on the stage. Outside, the night was pitch black, the wind howling through the stained glass windows, creating an eerie sound. Tonight's event wasn't just another political speech. It carried controversy, a clash of support and opposition. Bella, an 8-year-old girl with a small frame, stood amidst the crowd. She clutched an old, worn Bible tightly in her hands, her fingers trembling as they traced the faded edges of the pages. It was a keepsake from her grandmother, who always told her that the strongest faith was the one that dared to ask questions. But tonight, Bella wasn't sure if she was brave enough. In the corner of the room, a group of skeptics murmured among themselves. They weren't shouting or disrupting the event, but the tension they radiated was suffocating. Bella's mother sat beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Leaning down, she whispered, "If you truly want to ask, then ask. But remember, not everyone likes honest questions." The murmurs faded as Trump stepped onto the stage. The room fell into an expectant silence. Bella swallowed hard, her small heart pounding against her ribs. Tonight, she would ask her question. A question that might change everything. Bella's fingers tightened around the worn leather of her grandmother's Bible, her palms slightly damp with nervous sweat. The church hall, once filled with low murmurs, had fallen eerily silent. Overhead, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting long shadows on the wooden floor. The scent of old books and polished pews lingered in the air, but Bella barely noticed. Her mind was racing. The adults around her stood in line, waiting for their turn to speak. They asked about taxes, healthcare, and jobs, topics Bella didn't fully understand. But she wasn't here to ask about policies. Her question was something else entirely, something deeper. As she took a small step forward, her legs wobbled. The room felt too big, the air too heavy. Her mother, sensing her hesitation, squeezed her shoulder gently. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. But Bella knew she did. If she didn't, she'd regret it forever. The line moved forward, and suddenly she was next. Trump's gaze swept over the crowd, landing on her small frame. His usual bold expression softened just slightly, as if surprised to see a child standing among the adults. He raised a hand and gestured for her to speak. Bella took a shaky breath, her voice barely above a whisper at first. "Mr. Trump, what does God mean to you?" The moment the words left her lips, the air in the room seemed to freeze. Conversations stopped. Chairs creaked as people leaned in. Even the skeptics in the corner, who had spent the evening exchanging doubtful glances, fell silent. It was as if Bella had pressed pause on the entire world. Trump, a man known for his quick responses and unwavering confidence, didn't answer right away. He simply looked at her, really looked at her. His eyes flicked down to the Bible clutched tightly against her chest, then back up to her wide, determined gaze. For the first time that evening, he hesitated. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone. The hall, which had once felt so vast, now seemed impossibly small. The only sounds were the distant hum of a ceiling fan and the faint rustling of someone shifting in their seat. Bella swallowed hard, her throat dry. She hadn't meant to shake the room like this. She had only wanted an answer, one she had been searching for ever since her grandmother passed. But now, standing under the heavy gaze of 100 strangers, she felt something else creeping in. Fear. What if he ignored her? What if the crowd turned against her? Then Trump exhaled, the microphone amplifying the sound. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, lower, steadier. "That's a big question," he said. And for the first time in her life, Bella felt that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone in asking it. Bella's heart pounded in her chest as she stood there, waiting. The air in the church hall remained heavy, thick with anticipation. She could feel the weight of 100 eyes pressing down on her, some filled with curiosity, others with skepticism. The Bible in her hands felt heavier now, as if it carried not just her faith but the expectations of everyone in the room. Trump's pause stretched longer than she expected. He was a man known for quick comebacks and unwavering confidence, yet at this moment he seemed almost thoughtful. He shifted slightly, adjusting the microphone in his grip. The overhead lights cast sharp shadows on his face, highlighting the deep lines of experience. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice steady but quieter than before. "That's a question people have been asking for centuries," he said, his tone carrying an unusual weight. "And the answer? Well, it's different for everyone." Bella held her breath. That wasn't what she expected. She thought he'd say something bold, something absolute. But instead, his response left space for doubt, for reflection, for something deeper than a rehearsed answer. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in approval, others whispered among themselves. A man in a dark suit folded his arms, his expression unreadable. The tension in the room hadn't disappeared. If anything, it had shifted, transformed into something even more intense. Bella's fingers tightened around the edges of her Bible. "But what does he mean to you?" she pressed, her voice stronger this time. She didn't care about broad answers or political correctness. She wanted something real. Trump exhaled through his nose, considering her again. "God is strength," he said at last. "He's the reason people keep going when everything feels impossible. I've seen it in families who've lost everything, in soldiers coming home from war, in people fighting battles no one else can see." His gaze flickered over the audience before landing back on Bella. "And I felt it too." A chill ran down Bella's spine. She hadn't expected him to admit something so personal. For a moment, she forgot about the crowd, forgot about the cameras, the whispers. It was just her and the man standing at the podium, two people searching for meaning in a world that often felt too big, too chaotic. Then, a loud cough broke the silence, snapping the room back to reality. The moment was over, but its impact lingered. Some people clapped hesitantly, others nodded in quiet approval. A few remained skeptical, their expressions unchanged. But Bella didn't care about them. As she stepped back, her mother reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "You did good," she whispered. Bella wasn't sure if she had gotten the answer she was looking for. But as she clutched her grandmother's Bible to her chest, she realized something. Sometimes, the question itself was just as important as the answer. The night air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. Bella's footsteps echoed against the cold pavement as she made her way through the dimly lit street. Her heart pounded against her ribs, faster with each step. The weight of the Bible in her hands, once a source of comfort, now felt like a heavy burden pressing down on her. The feeling had started earlier that evening, a nagging sense of unease that she couldn't shake. After the tense conversation with Trump, Bella had tried to push aside the strange chill creeping up her spine. But now, alone on this empty road, that chill had turned into a full-blown fear. A sudden rustling in the bushes to her right made her stop. She held her breath, her fingers tightening around the worn leather of her grandmother's Bible. "It's nothing," she told herself. "Just the wind." But deep down, she knew better. She took another step forward. A shadow flickered at the corner of her vision. Bella spun around, her breath hitching. Nothing. Just the empty road stretching behind her. But the feeling of being watched was undeniable. She quickened her pace, the heels of her boots clicking faster against the pavement. The street lights ahead flickered, casting eerie, shifting shadows. Another sound, a faint footstep, echoed behind her. Bella's stomach twisted. She turned her head slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse over her shoulder. A dark figure stood at the far end of the road, half hidden in the shadows. Her throat tightened. Was it just her imagination? A trick of the dim light? Then the figure moved. Bella's breath came in shallow gasps. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to run, but her legs felt rooted to the spot. The figure took another step forward. A man. Tall. Broad shoulders. His face obscured by the darkness. Adrenaline surged through her veins. Clutching the Bible to her chest, she forced her legs to move. She sprinted, her breath ragged, her pulse pounding in her ears. The old church was only a few hundred feet away. If she could just get there. Behind her, the footsteps quickened. Bella's lungs burned as she pushed herself forward. The church's heavy wooden doors loomed ahead. She reached for the handle, her fingers trembling. With a desperate yank, she pulled the door open and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind her. Silence. She pressed her back against the door, chest heaving. Outside, the footsteps had stopped. The world beyond the church walls was still. Had he followed her? Was he still out there, lurking in the shadows? Bella's hands shook as she flipped open the Bible, its pages worn with age and love. A single verse stared back at her, its words steady and unwavering. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. Whatever was out there, whatever darkness lurked beyond these walls, she wasn't alone. Bella's pulse pounded in her ears as she pressed her back against the heavy wooden doors of the church. The silence outside was suffocating, stretching endlessly, as if the world itself was holding its breath. She could still feel the weight of the figure's gaze, even though she could no longer see him. Was he still out there, lurking just beyond the threshold? Or was he waiting for her to let her guard down? She forced herself to take slow, steady breaths. The dim glow of the candles inside cast flickering shadows along the stone walls, their light doing little to dispel the fear tightening around her chest. The old church smelled of aged wood and melted wax, a scent that should have been comforting, but tonight, it felt ominous. Her fingers trembled as she clutched her grandmother's Bible. The verse she had read moments before repeated in her mind like a whispered prayer. Fear not, for I am with you. But fear was all she could feel. A sudden, loud bang shattered the silence. The heavy wooden doors shuddered against her back. Bella's breath caught in her throat. No, he was trying to get in. She scrambled backward, her boots sliding against the polished floor. The doors rattled again, harder this time, as if something massive was slamming against them. Bella spun around and grabbed the nearest pew, dragging it toward the entrance with all her strength. It groaned against the floor, the sound echoing through the empty church. Another impact. The doors buckled slightly. Bella's hands were slick with sweat as she pushed another pew against the doors, barricading them as best she could. Her chest rose and fell in shallow gasps. This wasn't just some strange stalker, there was something wrong with this presence. Something unnatural. She needed help. Her eyes darted to the altar at the far end of the church. The old landline phone sat on a small wooden table beside a candle, its cord coiled like a lifeline. Another crash. The doors cracked slightly, and through the gap, she saw a glimpse of something dark. Too dark. A void-like shadow, shifting unnaturally, as if it wasn't bound by the laws of this world. Bella turned and ran. Her boots pounded against the floor as she lunged for the phone, snatching it off the hook with shaking hands. She punched in the numbers, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Come on, she whispered desperately. The dial tone buzzed in her ear. Then, silence. No ringing. No static. Nothing. Her stomach twisted. The phone was dead. A slow creak echoed behind her. Bella turned, heart hammering. The crack in the doors had widened. The air inside the church grew unnaturally cold, her breath now visible in ghostly puffs. The candles flickered violently. She wasn't sure if she could escape this. But she had to try. Clutching the Bible to her chest, Bella took a slow step back. If this thing was going to come for her, she wouldn't go down without a fight. Final message. Sometimes, the smallest questions bring the biggest answers. Bella once thought her life was peaceful, free of fear. But a simple question, why were strange things happening, opened a door to a world filled with danger, forcing her to confront things she had never imagined. The answer didn't just change her life, it helped her understand herself. And sometimes, fear itself leads us to enlightenment. In the darkness, when her heart pounded and her breath quickened, Bella realized that fear was not the enemy. It was a teacher, pushing her to find light in the midst of despair. Without fear, she would never have discovered the courage hidden deep inside her. Without fear, she would not have learned to trust herself and fight back. In the end, Bella understood that the truth had always been there, waiting for her to be brave enough to face it. And in her most terrifying moment, she finally found her true self.